I think this bit is always on your recordings, isn't it?
Yeah.
You need elevator background music for this bit.
Live on LinkedIn. Just waiting for YouTube to find its thing. Block the sound from there. There we go. I can now go live on YouTube. So apologies to anyone on LinkedIn that's jumped on. That has just seen me sat here for 2 seconds. We are now live on both LinkedIn and YouTube. I want to thank you, Freya, for joining me today for what is our penultimate live series episode of the Creating Better Business Experiences, should I say, live series that we've had both on YouTube and on LinkedIn. This episode is all around agency strategy, and speaking to someone that has been deep within the agency strategy, developing agency strategy, both with her clients, but also agency side for a very long time, very experienced, and has probably learned a lot of lessons that I know many founders are facing very much currently, and different challenges that they face as they scale. So I'd love to introduce Freya. Freya, tell us a little bit about you and kind of your journey into what you do right now at Be Right.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for having me, first of all. My name is Freya. I run a little agency consultancy business called Be Right. We're up in Yorkshire, hence the name. I was agency side for just over 11 years before I went self-employed as a consultant. And I guess my agency journey started straight out of uni. So I graduated in something that I've never actually used in a profession. So I've got a degree in international events management, which is completely irrelevant to what I'm doing today. And found this lovely agency in Leeds that I applied for straight out of uni. And they were essentially looking for somebody to introduce a new service offering to support what they already had. So they had PPC and some technical SEO in-house. And I basically came in to introduce the content and content marketing side of things. So kind of digital PR, pushing content out for visibility, traffic, links, that kind of thing. And we were kind of riding a bit of a trend of that topic happening within digital marketing. So the growth within the agency kicked off fairly quickly after we officially started offering that service. So I think I was only in the agency for maybe, I don't know, 6 or 8 months or something before we had to recruit our first full-timer within my team. So at that point, I think we were 10 full-time people, but just me and my department. And then we recruited more and more. I had part-timers, I had full-timers, I had people doing this work in English and in different languages across most European countries. And then we signed some really, really big brands, and then it all kicked off from there. And that's where the scaling really started. So we at some point, years into running my department, we had to recruit 5 people every month for a couple of months, just to keep up with capacity and to deliver the work that we sold. And we had this amazing sales machine that just, generated new business constantly. And I was basically there to keep up the operations and to make sure we can deliver what we've sold. So that was kind of my role for the first 7 years, agency side. And then I moved into a different role, delivering the agency strategy for the whole business. So I worked with the board of directors and the senior managers to basically map out what the growth plan is. And then I was responsible for translating the growth plan into actual initiatives and make them happen across the whole agency. So at that point, we were more than 100 people. And when I left working in agencies, we were 150 people. So it was kind of seeing it through from 10 people to a really large machine of 150. And at its biggest, my own department was close to 100 people, including the international offering. So it's, in hindsight, quite a few people. But that was kind of my background. And then I went self-employed, became a consultant, and I work with agencies now to help them grow, help them see their plans through to delivery, make operational changes, team design, anything to do with actually making growth happen and not just it being a concept that you want, but how are you going to make it happen, basically, is what I do with my clients.
I love that, because at the end of the day, I mean, your experience is hugely extensive, and actually making growth happen from being just you in your own department to actually scaling to over 100 people is ginormous. I mean, at its most beginning stage, when you started finding that you had to start bringing on more people, I mean, what were you really facing at that time?
I think when you're experiencing quite fast growth, or actually it doesn't have to be fast, but when you come to the point of having to recruit, that can be quite a scary thing to do. And of course, I wasn't the agency owner, so the pressure of making that investment wasn't directly on me, but I had to kind of decide when the point was to actually bring someone in. But a lot of agency owners get to that point when they're maybe at a size where they have to recruit their first senior manager, or an operations manager, or a new role that is a bit more expensive than usual. So I think it's knowing when the right time is to recruit. And I was very lucky because we had an amazing finance director who would challenge every recruitment decision, and that experience has taught me a lot about knowing when that right point in time is. So she would challenge me on things like, what is the resource like at the moment, and is the utilization actually chargeable? So are you doing client work with the time that you've got available? And if that chargeable rate is too low, then is it really justified to bring someone else in who then potentially increases the salary rate for the business but doesn't do enough chargeable work for clients? So things like simple things like knowing what your utilization is and your chargeable percentages, and just kind of understanding, are we at an actual point of low capacity, or are we just inefficient, or are we using our people in the right way, and are we using processes that make us efficient? So really kind of going through a bit of a checklist of, is this definitely the right point in time, but also in terms of what kind of role exactly do we need, what level of seniority and experience, what kind of problems are they going to solve for us and for the client, are they going to be freelance or full-time? When I was talking earlier about having to recruit 5 people in a month, we were at a point at some point where we had to offer evening shifts and weekend shifts to our existing people to see if anyone wanted to do more work, just to tide us over, because finding full-timers takes a bit of time. So I think the decision between part-time, full-time is quite an important one. So it's just really understanding, are we really at the point of recruitment? Is it urgent? Is it justified? Are we efficient? Can we afford it? What's the forecast, including this new salary? So those are kind of the simple steps, but then in reality, recruiting 5 people a month is, if you're not organized, can be an absolute nightmare. So I think over time, the more we had to recruit, we learned that we need these repeatable processes of bringing new people into the team. So the training program, people induction, having people processes set up that just work, like your one-to-ones, how you do performance reviews, how you work on people's progression. So over time, I just had to bring in more and more repeatable processes, because otherwise it's just chaos. And the bigger you get, the bigger the chaos becomes, and the more inefficient you are financially, the more stressed people get. So I think, the reality of recruiting a lot is that you have to organize yourself quickly. Otherwise, the experience for clients and for people is awful. And it's just causing stress and inefficiencies. So it's kind of making it from winging it into something that can be scaled to any number. So we were really at a point after a couple of years where we could have scaled into any number, because we had processes for everything and we knew what we were doing. But it was, at some point I was just in interviews. That was just my life. I was just interviewing people.
I mean, at that time when you were interviewing, was there any mistakes that you made that you could say to a founder, just don't do this?
I mean, those mistakes were made because of pressure. So I had to fill roles and I had to fill them quickly. And that led to definitely some mistakes in probably letting some people through that I shouldn't have let through,
Right.
which then later, costs you a lot of time and effort and headache. So I think for any founder who's at that point of recruitment, and if you're not under any specific time pressure, take your time, invite those people, meet them face to face. Don't just do a boring interview questionnaire. Really find out what they're about. My old CEO always said his best kind of test is, can you spend 2 hours in a car with them? Because then they're likable. They will be likable by teams, by clients. If it's not awkward, then they're probably a nice person. So I think, just kind of go with not just with your gut, obviously, do your normal vetting process, but get to know them properly as people, especially when you're a small agency. Finding the right fit culturally is much more important than saying, okay, they've got this skill and this skill and this degree and this training course. It's not as important as the cultural fit. And if they're a good, genuine person, I would say.
And from your perspective, what part is process in scaling? I mean, how you mentioned that quite a lot in both in recruitment, but for you, when it comes to scaling, how vital is it to have a really clear process within the agency existing and developing that?
Yeah, absolutely key. So when I say process, and many people hate that word, and I get it because it can
Yeah.
be stifling, especially if you work in a creative space.
Yeah.
But really think of it more along the lines of um, making sure that everyone knows what they're supposed to do. That's a process, basically. And if you think of it in kind of in people terms, and making sure everyone knows what they're doing, then actually you're doing something very positive by introducing a process, because it reduces stress, it increases clarity, efficiency, ambiguity between team members who don't actually know what they're supposed to do. So they might make up their own processes and wasting time and energy. So in terms of making things repeatable and predictable and and for people, I would literally go from every stage of what you deliver, take a step back and map out what that stage should look like and what you're doing
Yeah.
right now and what the ideal is. So literally starting from how you do a pitch over to how you do pricing and scoping, how you onboard a client, how you select the right people for the client, so resourcing and capacity planning, how you do ideation or creative workshops. At some point we had repeatable processes or automated processes for things like outreach to the media, because I had an outreach team of, I think, like 40 people at some point who would speak to journalists and bloggers and PR people. And in the beginning, we would create media outreach lists from scratch every time, and it costs us hours and hours and hours of effort and work.
Yeah.
So we, took a step back, defined what kind of system we need. So we bought a journalist outreach database. We made pre-created outreach lists for certain industries or sectors. We put responsibilities in place of who owns each of those lists and maintains them and updates them, so that when we had a new client in, let's say, the fashion industry, we could go straight to that existing list where we had all the existing relationships with journalists. So I think it's really just a case of, like I say, go from start to finish and just map out what the ideal should look like, but do it with your team. So take a few of the key people that do those processes every day and, are responsible for those activities. Take them in a room and ask them, where do you spend your time? Where do you waste your time? How do you think it could be done easier? Because they will know. It's just we don't always ask them. And then just formalize it all into like a playbook, something that you can train people on, that people can refer back to. And then that's it really. It just creates that clarity of how are we supposed to do things, and how long should they take, and therefore how much does it cost to do those things. So knowing how long it takes to do an outreach list means when you sell to a client, you know that it takes X amount of days in a given month to do the outreach, and then you can price accordingly. So I think it's a lot. It's like making things repeatable makes you a better financial person, or makes better financial decisions as well for scoping and pricing.
Yeah, and you're right. It's creating that. It's almost creating that standardization around how you work. Particularly, gives a lot of time and headspace to not just the founder potentially of the agency, but if you bring in, you working with leadership teams, they actually have the opportunity to get some headspace to be able to go, how can we improve this? How can we adapt this? How can we think about this more creatively? Because
Yeah.
without working with any kind of standardized process, we're just
Yeah.
working off assumption based on what we think should happen, then everything else takes a hell of a lot longer, and everyone feels slightly frustrated about something that somebody else is doing, and they get to points where things happen twice,
Yeah.
and people then pass the blame very easily onto someone else that's not doing something right because they've not got the right touch points or communication processes. And
Yeah.
I mean,
It can be really stressful, and I'm sure you've seen it in your agency days. I've seen it. Everyone has seen it when something new gets introduced, either a new service that the agency is offering, or a new role is coming in, or just something new, and the process isn't defined. Then suddenly people it really winds people up the wrong way, and it's because it's change and it's stressful, and people just want to know what they're supposed to do. So
yeah,
again, like giving out a process or defining a process doesn't have to be this annoying, rigid thing. It really gives clarity, and it provides calm. And especially when
yeah,
your team is growing, if you have, 30 plus people, when things become a bit more complicated, you want calm and, and clarity, rather than everyone running around thinking, I have no idea what we're supposed to do here. Yeah,
yeah.
it's not very nice.
When you get to that stage of 100 plus teams, I mean, challenges change a little bit at that point. There may be some similar challenges, but there are also some challenges that are slightly different. I mean, what's the difference at that phase that you generally find, that from your perspective, your experience in working in those teams, but also as a founder or leadership teams in that stage, like what generally do they feel that they're struggling with? And what would be
Mm.
your advice for those, depending on those challenges?
Yeah, I think when you get to like three digits, making change happen is just a bit harder, because most changes start somewhere at the top, where some strategic goal gets set out, and then it has to happen throughout the whole agency. And
Yeah,
getting people on board and implementing change with 100 plus people, 150 people, can take a long time, can be more complicated. You've got so many decision makers, so many different opinions. So that becomes a whole new challenge, really. And I guess on the way to becoming 100 or 150 people, what I found really challenging as well was when I had to start letting go of knowing everyone and everything and doing everything myself, and adding layers of managers in between me and the team. And I think this is what, of course, now with my clients as a consultant, is a big challenge, because we always make an assumption that we know everything best, because we've
yeah,
created it. Um, and I found that really, really hard. And my first couple of managers, we promoted from within the team. So we invested in development of existing team members, and then they became managers. But then over time, we had to recruit external senior managers, because we needed
yeah,
different skill sets and maybe something we didn't have internally. And I found it really hard at some point to have, like, I think I had like 5 or 6 managers that were looking after the different departments. And I just had to make sure that I've got the right information in the shortest amount of time, if that makes sense. So I think for agency owners now that are in that situation, is really thinking about what data or information do you need to trust that everything's okay, but you
yeah,
don't need to actually go in and be involved on a day-to-day basis to know that everything's okay. So
yeah.
kind of standard KPIs that your teams can report back on, that really your management system should automate, like the utilization in each department, the profitability within each department, but then more kind of people-based bits of information as well, about, who are your superstars in the team and how can we nurture them, or where are performance issues or mental health issues, or like really getting some condensed information about the health and the quality of the people, the work, the output, so that even when you have 5 managers or heads of departments or whatever between you and the rest of the team, you always know what's going on and you can kind of just trust things. And, over time, definitely one of the realizations I've had quite quickly is that most people are just better at things than I am. And the fact that, my worry about letting go of running the department myself was completely unnecessary, because people are good at management. And if you let them do things independently, they will find ways of doing things much better than you have. And I think it's, just a sense of letting go and letting people do their thing, and realizing that actually, most people are just as good at this as you are, or probably better, is quite a liberating thing.
Yeah, it's giving the team the breadth or the bandwidth to be able to try as well. I know that when I worked with the founder, and I was taking a lot of the client management and project management from her. So we were a lot smaller in terms of, but it's still that trust element that someone they can step up and do that job. I think from your perspective, what would you say if someone is really struggling to let go of that control? What would be your piece of advice to first for them to be able to start that process of letting go of that control of having to do everything?
I think the first thing is to have real clarity on what does that role need to do that you want to step out of. So being crystal clear about, why do I need my number 2, for example? Like if you're a founder, you might need an ops director, or you might want to employ someone to look after your client services or whatever. So like real crucial roles that you don't want to let go of. So really clearly defining what those need to look like, but also learning from other agency owners maybe, or experts or consultants about what does that role need to do on a daily basis that I might not be aware of, so that when they come in, I actually know what to ask them to do and to set out expectations really clearly, and how we measure their success, how we train them. Maybe someone external can come in and train them with me or for me to the standard that I'm expecting. So I think it's like, just really planning out, what does this role need to be really good at, so that I can step away and be calm and trust that they can do the job. Once I know that, how should I do the interview to find this right person for the job? And then when they come in, what does the induction period look like to give them the best starting point? Because what happens quite often in small growing agency is you bring someone in and you just throw them in there, and then you let them go, especially in sales teams. You kick them out after 3 months because they haven't done what they need to do. But really, you haven't done what you needed to do to give them a good start and to brief them properly and to set out expectations. So just good preparation, making sure the new role reports to you in a way that gives you confidence that they're doing what they need to do.
What are some of the best bits? Like if it all goes right, if you think back to both your agency days and the work that you do with clients now, what do some of those wins look like from that process, where they've actually been able to first hand off, but they're actually going through those different stages of growth? I know that we often don't think about this. We don't look at this because we're always looking for that next step. But what are some of those indicators that you're doing this well?
It could be really kind of black and white numbers to start off with. So if you're performing well, if your clients are happy and profitable, so client feedback, but also staff feedback, things like employee net promoter scores. Like there are numerical things that you can look at to say, actually, we're doing well. But then I think that doesn't necessarily tell you the whole truth of whether your scaling or growth journey is a positive one. So I think listening to people and speaking to people all the time is really where the truth happens. So in one-to-ones, in staff surveys that actually ask for people's opinions and written feedback, and it's frustrating because it can be a bit of a moan fest when you open yourself up to suggestions from, let's say, 150 people in a survey. But then at least and you can spot patterns. And I was very lucky because I worked for the agency that I talked about was very good at this and constantly asking for feedback and doing something about it and using data to make changes. So you can kind of know whether it's going well from the numbers, the performance numbers, but also just knowing if your culture is good. Like when people come to the office, is there a good vibe? Do people help each other? Do people go out of their way to support each other? Are there friendships within the agency? Are there people that have been with the agency for a very long time? So again, the agency I worked for, I was there for 11 years, for example, but we had a lot of our senior managers were there for a decade and sometimes more. Have people moved up to different roles? So have people moved from one role to, let's say, a manager role or a completely different discipline in a different department because they love the company and they've been developed and supported in a way that means they learn and they flourish and they can move across departments. So yeah, it's the very black and white side of things, but also the what's the vibe, what's the culture, how long do people stay with you, are we supportive? Yeah, I'll probably say those are the main ones.
It sounds like in order to actually get a true representation, you have to get that 360 degrees view of what is happening, because one without the other, I think from both perspectives, doesn't give you a clear enough picture as to where you currently are as an agency, where you are in terms of growth, but also where those potential gaps are that you're missing to be able to help you get to that next stage of where you need to be. I know that you talk a lot about strategy, and I think this leads very nicely onto when it comes to being able to translate strategy into an agency. What would you say from your perspective is kind of some of those key fundamentals that have to be included in order for it to be successfully translated?
I think so when I work on the strategic direction with my clients now, the first thing that I usually notice is there some kind of like goal for growth, but that I'm not clear why they want to grow. And if they can't explain that to me, it will be very hard to make it happen and to explain it to the wider company or even to themselves. So I think it needs a bit of a why are you trying to grow? What's the whole point of doing it? Because it's hard. So tell me why you want to actually grow and to what number and why, and what's your service that you're offering, and like really understanding why is growth even necessary? Because a lot of agencies can do very well staying at a certain size forever and just being profitable and fun and great businesses. So if you have the ambition to grow, what is it? Especially from the kind of founder perspective, are you wanting to sell eventually? Are you on some kind of path, 5-year path, to maybe step out of the business or sell or become a chairman or shareholder or whatever the goal is to be really clear on your why. And then from there, okay, if we want to grow revenue by 20%, let's say, how exactly are we going to do this? And what's the evidence that we can do this? And if we have evidence that actually we've been horrendous at selling in the past, then why is the goal 20%? If it's 20%, then where is that growth coming from? So like, I just basically ask constantly how, why, where's that data coming from? Why do you want to do it? Who's your ideal client? Like, I just basically pick holes in anything that I think is not very strategic. And then the more clarity you get, you can then create real initiatives. So, okay, revenue needs to grow by 20%. We've now defined who your ideal client is. We've defined what your barriers are currently that mean you're not growing 20% in revenue year by year. So how do we remove those barriers? What's the first thing we need to do next quarter to kick this initiative off? What does good look like? Where do we want to be at the end of this year? Who owns what? When do we catch up again? So like rigor and process and accountability, but most importantly, clarity on if your goal is 20% revenue increase, how are we going to do this? Like real concrete actions to do that. And nothing annoys me more than an agency saying we want to grow revenue by 20% and then they announce it. And then it's kind of like, well, we've told our client teams and sales teams that we need to grow by 20%, but we're just not growing. And because there were no actions and there was no, and this happens a lot.
It's the we've said it, so people definitely understand exactly what they want. We need them to do from here.
Yeah, and I've done that. I've done it. I was the person when I was agency side. I was the person in some instances saying, well, we want to work in XYZ way, and here's our goal. And 3 months later, thinking, well, why hasn't it happened? And like along the way of kind of learning how you have to be so concrete and okay, what does that mean for this role? So we've got an account director. Yeah. What does 20% revenue growth mean for this particular role? And then for an account manager, and then for an account exec, and then for someone doing design work, like really being so concrete about how it applies to everyone so that we can make it happen across the agency. And I actually did a course in change management years ago because I really struggled to make larger changes or goals happen in a larger agency. And I needed to learn how to break something big into something manageable and then filter that through the whole business. Yeah. And one of the biggest learnings was that if your agency strategy is too big and too ambitious and it will eat into people's precious time, tight time, it's not going to happen. So it's like really knowing what's going on across the business, making sure that any strategic change that you're adding on top of that is actually doable capacity and headspace wise. And if the answer is, well, probably not because we're already completely overworked, then it's kind of bound to fail.
Yeah. I mean, being mindful of time, we've probably run over a little bit. If anyone does have any questions for Freya, please pop them in the comments and I will make sure that either I tag Freya in them so that she can answer them, or I'll filter those through and connect with her. I will drop all her links into the comments as well, so that if you haven't already connected or met Freya, you definitely should do so now. I mean, I know that one of my biggest takeaways for either if you are struggling at any phase of scaling and you're feeling those pains, or if you need to if you're looking to implement strategy through all layers of your agency, I think my biggest takeaway is process, planning, organization, and something that's concrete that goes across everybody. I mean, I don't know for you, Freya, if somebody is listening to this or listens back to this and they're saying, I'm really struggling with scaling, we really want to, and we're not sure of how to actually achieve it, or we are just firefighting. We can't find the time to be able to scale, or we've got a lot of problems. I mean, through multiple different areas of the business, whether that's profitability, whether that's utilization, whether that's scope creep. What is the first thing that they should do or take away from this?
That's a tricky one to answer because it is different for different agencies. But I would say in the majority of cases, you need a strong pipeline. Growth and scaling isn't going to happen if you don't sell. And of course, you could now argue, but I could sell and then we're losing clients because our client services offering isn't very good, or because we're not very efficient, or our operations are bad. That's also important. But growth cannot happen without the business coming in and then keeping the business. But it needs to come in the first place, whether it's growing existing clients or growing new business. When that happens, when you're in this like wonderful routine of business coming in more reliably, that's when all of those things happen that I talked about today, where you can think about, okay, what roles do I need? How do I structure my team? What processes do I introduce? But if you constantly worry about where the next paycheck is coming from and the next client is coming from, it'll be really hard to do anything. So I would say start with looking at what's your track record of selling, pitch close rates, how you pitch, how you put proposals together, how you find new potential clients. Why haven't you grown in the past?
Yeah.
And how do you just get the pipeline growing for now? And then really a lot of things fall into place. I've had lots of clients that thought they needed new roles and new processes and new operations and all sorts of things, but really it came down to there's no reliable pipeline. So you're panicking and you're thinking you can plug holes with getting ready for this growth that hasn't happened yet. So bring the business in first, and then things fall into place, because once the business is coming in, you're forced to take a step back. You're forced to bring new roles in and processes and all of that stuff. So yeah, sales, I would say, is where you start.
Amazing. I mean, that's not something I would have thought of as the first opportunity, but for anyone that is going through this, definitely speak to Freya. I know firsthand as to how amazing she is, and the experience
Thank
that she's
you.
got will definitely completely transform your agency. So please don't hesitate to do it. And again, if you have any questions, drop them in the chat. I look forward to next week is our last live series of the season. It has been a hell of a quarter that we've run these, and I just want to thank you to anyone that's watching this for joining with us. I will be definitely asking for some feedback as we go into the new year, but thank you so much again, Freya, and I look forward to chatting with you soon.
Thank you very much.